accordingly.
Satsang number 5 is called aparigraha, and it means not to be possessed, not to grasp, not to grab onto. And you should understand what possession means and why everybody is possessed. But everybody is possessed, and not in the Hollywood version of Damien the Omen, but rather by all of the object orientation that we do, that we have to do. We look out into the world and we identify A, and we identify ourselves with A, and we grasp onto that, and suddenly we are possessed by that, identifying myself with that. I think I am that. I think I have a relationship to that. I start making a relationship to that, and now it becomes a part of me. I am possessed because of my grasping. And that's what the human being does. And that's what all of the human beings do. It's not right or wrong. That's just what we do. And it takes away our freedom immediately because we forget what we are in our essence. We lose sight of the truth. And so radical self-honesty comes with not identifying ourselves with any of that and knowing what we are at the essence. But nobody wants to do that. And so everybody is walking around with these so-called entity attachments. They call it
Yeah.
by some scary name because they don't know what's going on. But there's no entity attachment except for what you yourself are attaching to. And the great environmental, cultural, societal egregore, which is the great entity and identification and object orientation that society as a whole does, that we grasp onto, that we are educated by, that we are influenced by, that makes the psychic impressions on us, and thereby we frame our identities around. And now it looks like we are totally possessed by something we don't know. And because we don't know what we're possessed by, we call it some metaphysical label, and we start making another impression, and now we're possessed by that too. All of this incessant grasping, this grasping. So yeah, everybody is possessed. People will react because it goes against the belief system that we formed, and that belief system is it's what's keeping us safe, it's what's keeping us grounded, it's what's keeping us locked into our life. And so, very often a newly awakened person will come along and say, I've got the answer, this is what you must know. And somebody else will say, no, 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 that's not what I need to know. And now you got to fight. And now that newly awakened, born again Christians are so guilty of this. They go out and they try to convert the world, and the world does not want to be converted. New coaches are the same thing. Hey man, I've got the thing. I've got the mindset tweak. I've got the answer to all of your problems. But people, if you don't have the question, you can't have the answer. It's as simple as that. So whoever's on the receiving end has to first be possessed of that question, right? Because they're possessed of so much other stuff. If they're not possessed of the question, there's no getting through the barrier. Now, sometimes there's a little bit getting through the barrier, like with a child, right? The child's barrier is very weak right now. They haven't learned how to put up a really strong wall yet. And so poor kids, they get shaped and molded by the parents saying it's like this and like this, and teaching the kid what to grasp onto. But when somebody's ready for an honest conversation, that's the first time the word might have some effect. All those people that went to meet Jesus on the mountain, they went there semi-ready to hear something. They were curious, they were interested, they were intrigued, they had some reason for being there, and with that reason gave Jesus's words an inroad. And so some people who had just the minutest gap in their armor, right, because it was self-created, they opened it, they said, hey, come on in, do you have something for me? And maybe the master was able to put something in there, right? And maybe some people just shut it up immediately, saying, no, I don't want this. And the master never came and tried to force his way in. So the first card that popped out when you were telling me all of that was this card called debauchery. It's the Seven of Cups. It's what happens when we attach ourselves to a particular feeling, to a particular emotion, and we just let ourselves be sucked down into that emotion, sucked down into that feeling, sucked down into that way. We've grasped onto something so hard, whether it's bliss or whether it's depression, and we've let the inertia of that emotion just take us away. It's called debauchery, overfeeling, overly involved with the sensory apparatus that for this moment. And remember, the tarot cards are all speaking to this moment. So it's perpetually changing. It's something that we put our own attention on and take ourselves in a different direction. So here we're talking about the Seven of Cups. We're talking about water. We're talking about fluidity, but we're talking about stagnant water in this case because it's not flowing, because you have been sucked down into a quagmire of a particular feeling. And while on your end, you might have the part where there's the elation that's supporting you. You might have the self-confidence, the self-awareness. But on the other end, there's a self-righteousness about it too, saying, I'm right, I've got it, and it's not allowing you to move in another direction. So it's kind of stagnant. But here I've also been shuffling these cards the entire time as well. And so if you just tell me when to stop shuffling, once again, we'll pick out a more intentional card and see how it supports this. All right, so this is the High Priestess, and I pulled it in the reverse order. And how these two relate to each other. How these two relate to each other. So the 7 is, let's say, to the left of 6. And 6 is the Christ center. 6 is in the heart. So we're talking, if we're looking at this in terms of how we flow in our body, we'll say that when we are in debauchery, when we're self-righteous, when we're feeling, we're in our hip. And we're shooting from the hip, and we're, giving the world what we feel is best. And we're bringing to the world what we feel is best according to our own particular visions of joy. That's the 7. And the 7 is full of different kinds of feelings. It's the emotional world. But when we bring, for want of a better metaphor, Kundalini upwards, when she rises, she hits the knot of consciousness that's often found in the heart, what the Kabbalists call the Christ center, what the people call Christ consciousness. We come into our heart, the heart starts humming. And so that's the place that we want to be on our drive to higher consciousness. And the emotions often get in the way. That's what's happening in the 7s right now, pulled into the quagmire. But the High Priestess comes and tells us about the journey from on high, from the Father, from the crown, into the heart. It's called the Path of Wisdom. It's key number 2 in the tarot. There are 21 trumps in the tarot cards, from 0, the Fool, to 21, the Universe. And the High Priestess is trump number 2, or key of wisdom number 2. And the keys of wisdom show us these pathways from, for example, from the 7 into the heart would be the path of death, right? But from the crown into the heart is the path of the High Priestess. And she is the path of memory. She is the camel that carries us across the desert because she is holding all the good water, all the pure stuff. And so she brings us directly from the crown into the heart. Now, getting back to the metaphor of Kundalini, we say that when Kundalini rises, and because you're not entirely familiar with this construct of Kundalini, she is the life force. She is our energetic force. She is the energy of our body. She is what's called prana. And she has 3 faces: the energy body, the prana, the life force, the intelligence, that energy which gives us our intelligence. We think, therefore we are, said Descartes. We think, but all of the sages ask us this question: what's thinking? Who's thinking? And they say, check out the witness, right? Who's witnessing what thinking, right? And they say, engage in this process of self-inquiry. Okay, who's asking the question? Go deeper, go deeper. Is it just chemicals firing across synapses that create this great complex pattern of thinking? No, there's a thinker. There's a thinker, and there's a witnesser of the thinker too. This great intelligence that inspires the entire universe, that somebody says is a great intelligent design, is there's an intelligence. And we talk about, again, entities, and we talk about spirit guides, and we talk about external intelligent forces. There is a great intelligence in this universe, and it's an intelligence that we are tapped into as well. And so there's stuff like telepathy and stuff like synchronicity and stuff, there is an interconnection. There is a great flowing intelligence. Kundalini is also this intelligence. And she's also a wisdom body. There's a grounding of that intelligence in a silent knowing. And that silent knowing comes when we are still, completely still. When that crown is open and connected with the universe, I can receive and I can know. But as soon as I take one step away from still point, now I'm working with intelligence. It's not silent knowing anymore. And so now I need to know, and now I need to know how to know what I know and see what I don't know, integrate all of this and make a very skillful approach into my life. When the high priestess is coming down, she's drawing down the intelligence into the heart. And this is where the three Kundalinis nest. They rise, they pierce the knots of consciousness, and then they descend again. They rise all through the central channel, bridging the gap, bridging the abyss between the third eye and the crown. So when the three Kundalinis rise and pierce the knots of consciousness to bridge the gap that is the third eye, when it opens up, when that knowing becomes, now it's awake, and now it has to nest. And so it travels the path of wisdom called the high priestess to come nest in the heart. And now we talk about heart-centered service. Now we talk about heart-centered approach to life. Now we talk about living from the heart, living in Christ consciousness, being the expression of Christ consciousness, living like the Christ. And the question comes, according to, or the answer comes according to your question, right? I'm going to be baptized and all of this is happening. What to do now? Well, now you go out and live like the Christ, because that was the whole purpose of being baptized. That is why Christ got baptized. That is why he took himself out into the desert for so many days and had himself a deep conversation with the entire spectrum of reality, right? And he was taken to the left side and he was taken to the right side, and he saw the entire layout of the human condition. And I think Matthew got it wrong when he said that the master was tempted out there. I don't think he was tempted. I think he just saw it. And he was very, very responsive to what he saw, because the story came back that the master supposedly said that the devil said, hey, man, why don't you turn the stone into bread? And, Jesus ostensibly said, because man doesn't live just by bread, but by every word. Every word. Fuck, how deep is that, man? He lives by every word. Every word is a creation. Every word is God. Every word. Coffee. Culture. I. And the eye maker comes in and starts identifying with all of these objects, calling it reality, saying, I need bread, need, desire, feel, bread, all words, good words. And I put them into a sentence and I make some context and I attach myself to that. And suddenly I've created a reality, hunger, satisfaction, health and nutrition, building the body, all sorts of stuff, so many details that I just can't keep track of all of that. I cannot keep track of all of that, but I am definitely keeping track of all of that. I am seeing that. But most people, 99.9% of the people, do not want to keep track of all of that. They do not want to. And so there is an ego that lets us run on autopilot. We program that, and then we blame the ego later. Hey, no, the ego made me, hey, that's all very egotistical, man. The ego is not autonomous. It's an automaton. We program that thing because we can't keep track of all of that. But sometimes a conscious operator comes along and says, okay, I'm ready to look. I'm ready to see what's going on, and engages with some radical self-honesty and radical truth because they want to know what's going on. And they take themselves out into the desert for a little while and see all of that and engage in a serious, serious practice, and then come back from the desert and get ready to get about a serious mission. And so they get baptized. They lower their head in front of their brother and say, baptize me in the Holy Spirit, I'm ready. And I go out and I get about my mission. And I know I'm going to be received with certain feelings because everybody is afflicted by a great disease, a disease called ignorance, a disease called possession. So what to do about that? I have a mission. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my mission. And maybe they're going to crucify me. That's okay. They're innocent kids. I forgive them, just as my Father forgives them. Is that you? Rhetorical question. That's what baptism is. Now time to go out and live like the Christ. Most people go to church and they get the ritual, okay? And then they go out and they do whatever. Somebody wants also to go out and live like the Christ too. Next question. So I'm going to go with the first card that flipped out, and I'm going to do the one that you pulled last. The first card that I pulled out is the Three of Wands, and it's entitled Virtue. And it harkens back to a story, a conversation between the master Socrates and his disciple named Phaedrus. And you can hear more about Phaedrus in a nice little book by Robert Pirsig called The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a lovely 1970s hippie book. Great, great read, easy read, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But Socrates, or Phaedrus, was supposed to have asked his master once upon a time, what's good in this life? What is good? And Socrates was said to have answered. Socrates, you know, he had a lot of game. He was the wise guy of his time. And he said, Phaedrus, how can I or anybody else tell you what's good? Virtue. What is virtue and what is vice? What is good and what is bad in this life? This is the meaning of this card. It's found in the threes, in the sacred feminine, where all of the understanding of life is intuited, the highest understanding. What's good? Am I the risen Christ? How can I tell you that? How can anybody tell you that? I would be a liar if I told you something, yay or nay. I shouldn't involve myself in such a question of virtue. But you should deeply involve yourself in questions of virtue. What is virtuous? And of course, you know all of the stories of chivalry and ethics and morality, and everybody says, everybody knows, you know, this is good and this is not good. But it gets back to the very first premise of grasping onto and identifying with various ideas. Okay, what idea do you want to identify with now? Because that's huge. That's what you want to be. That's your own self, your own soul spark, your own flame of freedom from deep within you calling out to you. That's what you want. So if that's what you want, that's what you must be. That's number one. Number two, second card to flip out. This is the Four of Wands. First we have the Three of Wands, then we have the Four of Wands. So they're intimately connected, and the Four of Wands is called the card of completion. And when we're looking at the evolution from the original force, the original source, into emanated reality, into the final culmination that creates this embodied condition that we're all enjoying today, we come from point to line to plane, and then birth into physicality. And that birth into physicality is what is in the four. It is the culmination of all forces come together, ready to birth out into a new creation. So the question now gets thrown back to you, okay, what are we ready to create? And it's intimately connected to our sense of good and bad, and that sense that I was just talking about just now. Am I Christ risen? I am about to be baptized. Big questions for you. Now, the card that you insisted that I pull. is the Ten of Swords. This is called ruin. Lots of swords crossed and bent, all hit upon the iron of the earth. Nothing cutting, all dulled, completely ruined. This is the number 10, the sphere lowest on the tree of life, in our feet where we touch the ground. It is our embodied condition. And in our embodied condition, we have swords, we have wands, we have cups, we have discs. We have all of the different elements inside of our body. And so how I'm treating my swords right now is leading to my ruination. How I am engaged in my airy adventures, how I am using my intelligence is leading to my ruination. My swords are blunting. My swords are bending. My swords are not cutting as they need to cut, because the swords, when we see the Ace of Swords all shining and brilliant, when we see the Two of Swords giving us peace of mind, when we see the Four of Swords at truce, not attaching to this or that, when we see the swords doing stuff, the swords are doing stuff. But down here in the tens, down here in the world, your swords are not doing what they need to be doing. You're not applying your intelligence in the way it needs to be applied, not skillfully. According to the sages, there is a skillful means of applying our intelligence to our endeavors, depending on what we want to do, depending on the goal. What is the real goal becomes the question, and then how to achieve that goal becomes the necessary introduction to the means that we are going to apply to the achievement of that goal. So there's some clarity needed here. There's a little bit of a step-by-step process. What is the real goal? And how should I approach that goal in order to achieve that goal? What am I doing currently? And how can I tweak that in order to get closer to my own stated aims? That's the one that you wanted. Next question. Good advice. This is called the sun. And when I see the sun, the first thing I hear is, "Here comes the sun, little darling." You know that song, right? Beautiful song. Yeah. And it fills me with elation. Sun was pulled in reverse, so it shows, it's also a path of wisdom. So it shows the directionality on the tree of life and where we go and how to approach this great question that just came out with the last pulls of the cards. One would think by looking at that bright sunshine that the answer should be yes, but it's not. And it's not a no either. It begs you to consider masters like Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was a great master. He was a scientist. He was an artist. He was a philosopher extraordinaire. You know Leonardo. Imagine for a moment, how did Leonardo bring from the ether into reality all of his art? How did Michelangelo bring from the ether into the Sistine Chapel to make that? How? How did these guys do that? What is inherent genius? What is that? How do I do that? And so this path of the sun shows us the path from the intelligence, or the path from, see, the sevens is on this hip, the eights are on this hip. The emotions are on one side, our mental faculties are on the other side. We've got mentality and emotionality on either hip, the heart. And just below the heart, around the solar plexus, they call the power center, the solar plexus is the imagination between the solar plexus and the sacrum, right? And interesting work is done between the solar plexus and the sacrum. But in the solar plexus, we have a great center of imagination. Imagination is a powerhouse, baby. How did Leonardo, how did Da Vinci, how did those masters access the imagination and work with the imagination to bring it into physical reality. Now, we look on Facebook, we look out into the world, we see people who are completely corrupted by their imagination. We see great productions by Hollywood appealing to the entire spectrum of imagination. Imagination, this imaging system. We can create images. We can identify with images. We use that imagination to create our reality every day, every day. Even when we wake up in the middle of the night, feeling I have to pee, wondering, do I go to the bathroom or not? Thinking I've just been involved in a very, very nice dream. Maybe I can stay here for a while. And then the imaging system goes on. I've got a bladder. And then the education comes in. Hey, what happens if I hold it? And all of this imagination starts going. Just in the decision whether or not to get out of bed in the middle of the night to go pee. Man, moment to moment to moment to moment, this grasping and identifying and imagining, and it is such a great mechanism that we're working with. Nobody wants to work with it consciously. It's just too much. Mind blown if I go there. Nobody has the steel to really engage with this process, but some artists are just moved since birth to do that. Some people are just inspired since birth. Some people clue to their mission and know I have to go in that direction. And so they allow the imagination to take them in that direction. It becomes a very, very conscious process. Even if they don't know all of the tricks and techniques and disciplines to engage that imagination, sometimes they get a coach. Sometimes they get a teacher. You know, Buddha had teachers, and Da Vinci had teachers, and Michelangelo had teachers, and, you know, teachers, they find their proteges and they say, there's something that I can educe from this student. This one's got something magical inside. Let's help them bring it out. And they chisel away at the fine edges and let that diamond shine. Sometimes this is a really good thing, and a good teacher will help to let that student's diamond shine. And a good student will allow that diamond to be produced, and they'll work at it, and they'll learn how to use their imagination. The sunshine is talking about the path from your mental faculties into the world of imagination, right? We looked at the answer to the last question. The last question was, am I the risen Christ, or something like that? And the question was something about, or the answer was something about the swords not being used in the best manner. But will this baptism be the harbinger of the end of suffering? Well, it could be. It could very well be. If we come into the imagination and start using the imagination in an intentional, empowering, enabling way, that's going to be the eliminating symbol of my suffering. Because what's really interesting about your question is that in the yogic philosophies and in the Buddhist philosophies, they say that life is a cycle of suffering and joy, suffering and joy. And when yoga, classical yoga, introduces this concept, they say that there are all of these practices that we want to engage before suffering can be alleviated. We need to know about the grasping. We need to understand about radical self-honesty. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need to prepare the ground of being for even further engagements with discipline on the way to enlightenment, the removal of suffering. That's what the classical yoga says. But when we get into classical tantra, now we have a new teaching. We have a teaching of the third eye lineage, the Netra Tantra, the Shaivite lineage, the non-dual lineage, that introduces practices from the ground up with the first injunction being, not 10 injunctions like I presented them recently, but the first injunction being, remove your suffering. Then you'll be ready to go further. As if that were possible. They present it as if it is a possibility. that you can do that with a decision. Just remove suffering. You don't have to do this, and this on the way. Just stop. Stop suffering, and you'll be ready for the next practice. If you can do that, the ground is fertile. If you can't do that, it's useless. So does the baptism represent an end to suffering? Possibly. How can I or anybody else tell you what's good? Get it? The path of the sun will bring you into the imagination. How is the imagination going to help you not suffer? Possible. It can be done. Can you stop right in this moment? Not care. It's okay. Take one step away from still point. And now we've got a choice to make. I'm hungry. Can I feed myself without suffering? Can I be hungry without suffering? I have a conversation to have with my buddy, with my mom, with my, right? Can I have this conversation without suffering? Maybe somebody else is going to suffer. Can I look upon them, feel empathy, feel sympathy, feel this, that, and the other without suffering? Can I allow feelings to rise from the ground of being as they do, according to all the thoughts that go, without attaching to them, without witnessing? In my 30 years in this life, I've been impressed by many, many different ideas. And now there are going to be many, many different connections going on. Can I see all that without suffering, know where it comes from, and neutralize all that through the witnessing and make new choices intelligently? Possible, possible. You need some training, I believe, but the card says it's possible to come into the sun center in the solar plexus. It's why I wear one tattoo there on the solar plexus, to come into the solar plexus and feel empowered through your imagination, because the imagination gives a lot of power. Can also be a very, very cruel center too. It can take you in any direction. She is called the Queen of Wands, intimately connected to the Three of Wands virtue, intimately connected to the Four of Wands, the completion stage, the readiment to go out. She was pulled in the reverse direction, which indicates flowing downward into embodiment, into manifestation, whereas the upward facing one is the journey towards self-realization, enlightenment, the one back to the so-called home. She's flowing down. She's called Shakti. She's called energy. She's called the force of life landing on you. So it's all of that that creates the inspiration to go and be baptized. It's all of that that creates the inspiration to express my art. It's all of that to go out, to create the inspiration to go out and save my loved ones, to let my love, my great innocent love, find its landing place finally. All of that influx is coming to you. That's what we would call a Kundalini awakening. She's awakening, and you are being enlivened and vitalized. Very nice, very nice. Grace descends on thee. Six of Swords. All signs point to yes, because you're thinking about this in the correct way. And that means from a place of love. So that's very, very beautiful, that you apply your intelligence in such a harmonious way, in such a beautiful way. Your intention is pure. The name of the card is Science, and it's very appropriate to this question, because there's no such thing as a twin flame. The word was created by Plato thousands of years ago, and it represented something that is not alive in the global conversation today. Look it up later, what Plato said about the twin flame. Today, there's many ideas. None of it can be verified. None of it can be validated. And so it is a product of our imagination. That's fact. And we have to understand where we ourselves are coming from when we address any particular idea. I can create this twin flame. But even in all of the deepest philosophies of Taoism, of Tantrism, of Buddhism, of this and that and the other, there is no validation or verification that a soul exists. In any of the religions of Abraham, there is no validation and verification that a God exists. The atheists win this one. We cannot prove anything. And yet the master said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, that mountain will move. And we look out at the mountain, and we've never seen anybody move a mountain, really. We can't bring that into a laboratory. And yet synchronicity is a thing. And Carl Jung tried to talk about how intention is interconnected and causation exists even if we can't see it. And there is something called non-local healing. There is a telepathic union between this psychic interface and all of that that's happening outside. So there's stuff that we can't validate and verify that is real, that we might put a word to if we were but intelligent enough to use our words in the way that the master said, each and every one of them is a piece of God. Each and every one of them. It's huge. Too huge for my vocabulary. But some philosophers come and do it pretty good. All signs point to yes, though the science says no. What the fuck does that mean? Because the card that flipped out was the five of discs, called worry. The five of discs is a physical card. It's the first discs card that's coming out in your spread today. We've had a lot of wands, we've had a few swords, and we've had some paths of wisdom, but now we're talking about the discs. Now we're talking about physical reality, and yet we're talking about the fives, one step above the six. So we've been in the hips with the 7 and the 8. The path of the sun has drawn us to the imagination in the solar plexus. The 6 puts us firmly in the heart center. We've had 3, virtue and the Queen of Wands, gracing us from on high. And the 4 in the shoulder, right? Ready to hold the burdens of my mission and go out and create. But now we've got the 5 on the other shoulder. And this is really nice because we're looking at a pretty good balance happening in the body too. But now we've got the 5 on the other shoulder, and the 5s, man, the 5s are, oh man, the 5s are tough. The 5s are what the Christ experienced when he went out into the desert. The 5s was seeing the entire spectrum from right to left. The 5s gives us deep fear, deep anxiety, deep worry. The 5s is where we feel conflict. When my body and my physical experience is telling me something not in alignment with my heart. But the weird thing about the 5s is they exist higher on the scale to the Father than the heart center itself. Higher than Christ consciousness, you cannot imagine. If I am Christ conscious, if I am the Christ living in my heart, oh my God, what is 4, 5, 3, 2, and 1? What is all that? He wasn't one with the Father until they tacked him up on the cross. Although he was, of course, he was always going around saying, it's inside. You are the child of your Father. But there's something being looked at even from the center of my Christ consciousness. I look out and I see something is wrong. And it causes inside of me some anxiety. This is not so good. It makes a worry inside of me. Yeah. And so what's the reality of that worry in the physical world? This can be verified. This can be validated. What's causing the anxiety? Because there's a truth that needs to be known there. What am I worried about? If there's something to be worried about, or there's nothing to be worried about. How can I or anybody else tell you what's good? You know what's good, and you know what you're worried about too. The answers to the twin flame, 5 and 6. The new aeon. You can see there is a God or a man, and a little God or a little man within that God and man. And then there's a shining one even deep in the center of that one too. And because it's in the reversed position, my first, and even looking at the lay of the card, my first impression is that it's a resounding yes. But the question, of course, has to be asked, what is miracle? And the card itself talks about the realization of what you are and who you are at the core, underneath the meat suit. And with such a realization, and awareness, when awareness is blossoming, the mundane becomes miraculous, and the miraculous becomes mundane. Because awareness knows itself and knows the interconnection of awareness. And so as natural being, miracles happen. It's called in the yogic tradition siddhi. It's how awareness presents itself. It just happens. It comes to the question of, again, mission and intention. For example, when I spent so much time in the Himalayas, I had many ideas of this and that. One idea once upon a time was that the village should receive snow because their apple orchards were not producing. And if they didn't receive snow, then the orchards could not flourish. And it was an idea. And so I called for the rains, and the rains came. Can't validate, can't verify. I can't say I had anything to do with that at all, but it was an idea. And there was a synchronistic response as well. Did I tell anybody about that? I didn't tell anybody about that. Wrote it in my journal. I thought it was a cute synchronicity. But I've had a lot of support for these ideas over the years. And I know, yes, awareness does present both according to intention and according to interconnection. And why I would say yes to the question of public presentation is because it's in the downward position from the hip into the foot. It leads from the eights, intelligence or mental application, into the tens, where the swords are currently bent. So that's where it would establish itself, this process of awareness blossoming. I have no idea how to read this in the context of, am I going to see a water bottle again or not? So clearly, if you know it's been taken to the lost and found, then you know how to retrieve it if you want to. The card that popped out is the 9, and it's called Strength. And this is going to play back to the Sun card. And it's also going to play to the 10s. Because the 10 of Swords says that you're not applying your intelligence as practically and impeccably as you might. And the Sun card, in response to will suffering be overcome, is encouraging you to come into the imagination. And all the talk around the imagination was to show you how that imagination might be applied in terms of getting about your mission after baptism. And so this question, will I, in accordance with the answer to the virtue, or the answer that was the virtue card, not being able to tell you good or bad, the 9s is the imagination center. And as we discussed, the imagination can be cruel and the imagination can be empowering. And so if I know that there is a process and a way that I could get, but I'd rather sit back and wait for a miracle, then it brings us to the story of the flood in, whatever that backwater town was, and people taking refuge on top of their houses, and rowboats coming by and people jumping into the rowboats right? You know the story, right? Yeah. Depending on your approach, no, you might not see that water bottle again, but depending on your approach, you certainly might. This is the empowerment and enablement of the imagination called Strength. First of all, the first card that popped out is the 10 of Wands. So again, we're in the 10s. And the 10 of Wands is when the energy is not being used correctly. It's dominating, it's oppressive, it's pushing you down. It's not helping. Again, we have to look at the science of autoimmune, the reality of healing, the reality of personal karma that we don't have anything to do with and sometimes can't touch. Most often can't touch. And then we have the card that you called for. She's the harlot of Babylon. She's Lady Godiva riding into town on her horse. All about that. I am all about that. Look at me, man. Look at me. I've got some juice. I've got some power. The harlot is high. By the way, she's also in reverse. I'll tell you about that in just a moment, the directionality. But the whore of Babylon, she's tough. Strong, strong girl. That's your Shakti. That's your force. So you've got some juice. How does she use that? This temptress, this great lust for life. She receives. She exerts influence. She makes some effects. But right now she's riding into the 5s. She's the parallel journey between the 4s and the 5s, riding above the Christ center. So she's high, she's got some juice, she's tough, she is Shakti, she's strong, she's got tits, man. She's got tits that turn faces. When Lady Godiva rides into town, all the guards look, they put their spears down and the other spears come up and they say, whoa. Yeah, everybody wants the whore of Babylon. Everybody wants to be the healer. Everybody wants to be the miracle worker. They want to be seen. They want to be known. Where does my mission get lost in ego? Where do I get lost in Babylon? Where does recognition from the outside become more important than recognition on the inside? And it's a tough call, because I remember when my dad was broken, he'd been broken all of his life, suffering with intestinal colitis, various neuroses that kept him in fear of the world. His saving grace was his son, because he loved me so much. His compassion was just overwhelming, but he couldn't deal with life. And I didn't know how to deal with him, just being a kid growing up. But when I became around 30, 32 years old, 33 years old, and I started getting into these yogic arts and this and that, I visited him once upon a time, and he was all broken and gray and suffering in his old age home and stuff. But it was the end towards his life. And I wanted to heal him. And I thought that I had developed the juice enough to battle with 60 years of karma and this and that. And so I called up my guru from Miami, Florida. And I said, hey, I really want to do something for my dad, all this stuff that you've taught me. And he's like, hey, man, all you can do is chant over a few drops of water and give it to him. And that's it. What else can you do? Buy him a TV if he wants a TV. Let him be comfortable, right? That was a really tough thing to reconcile inside of me, that I couldn't do any more than that. Because several years previous, this is years after the event that I'm going to relate now, several years previously, I had taken a little cap of water to a puppy dog that had just been hit by a bus, and he was all bloody and laying down in the street. And without feeling anything at all, I just happened to be called to that accident. There was no part of David involved in this operation that I'm going to tell you. I was sitting far away at a tea stall, and I heard a crying on the airwaves. And I was just moved in that direction, and I saw the bus and the car face off each other. Nobody's moving anymore, and there was this little puppy, and crowd gathered around looking at the puppy. And I just picked up the puppy. He's all bloody. Took him over to the side of the road, let traffic go through. And I took out a little cap or my mineral water from my backpack and poured a little cap of water on the puppy. Just sat with him for a second. Wasn't thinking of healing. Wasn't thinking of nothing. Really empty. I don't remember much of this. And suddenly, that puppy jumped up, licking me. The blood was all gone. It had disappeared. And he danced across the street, back into puppy life. And the first thing I remember is the crowd of people looking around or standing around me, like with their eyes all wide. I don't know what they saw, because my eyes were closed. And my master was also there in the crowd too. And I saw him there, and I walked up to him, and he just kind of grunted at me and said, lucky puppy. And that was it. It was finished. And later on, we would talk a little bit about Reiki. He asked me a question kind of offhandedly. He said, you got Reiki over there in Japan? And I was like, he knew this. And I didn't know why he was asking me this. I was like, yeah. And he's like, how long does that take to work? He asked me. And again, I know he knew this. And I'm like, 1 second, right? And he's like, yeah, that's right. When I blow the healing breath, sometimes that lifts immediately. He was a great master, and he was teaching me all of that stuff. And even though that miracle happened with that puppy, there was absolutely nothing I could do for my daddy either. This is a wonderful answer. Stop using your head like that. You can't break the laws of physics. You're using your head wrong. Both of these cards say that. The 10 is the same ruination card that came before, and the 8 is called interference. This interference in the mental system is what's causing the ruination. So if there is a art that needs to be expressed, and if there is an engagement with physics, then it can be engaged skillfully. Both sides. The art can be engaged skillfully, and the mission can be engaged skillfully, and physics can be engaged skillfully. But something about how we're using the intelligence should be more skillful, because right now it's causing much interference, and that's probably not going to be very supportive going forward. Yeah. This is the 8 of Wands. This is telling you how to engage the Sun. This is telling you how to engage the 3 and the 4. And this is telling you how to remedy the 8 of Swords, reconcile the 10 of Swords, how to enter the imagination. The 8 of Wands is the swiftness, the alacrity with which you use your mental faculties. The water bottle is a great example, right? I know, act, do. Don't play around. Swiftness of intelligence. This is what's to add to this right now. This is the answer. We want to enliven the mental capability, quicken that capacity, know how to apply the mind. I've got some big questions about my mission, about my art, about my life, about my loved ones and their healing, health. Huge, huge questions. Questions about my own development, where I'm going in this life, the meaning of life, my purpose in it. The swiftness, the energy of my mental capacities, and how I put that intelligence to use. That's what needs to be added to the mix right now. So I'm going to start with the first one that popped out. In the very beginning, you were talking about haven't read the Bible, adultery, this and that. Queen of Swords came out, or the Queen of Discs, sorry. And she is the mother overlooking her creation. She is the higher understanding. She knows when she looks out. She knows, she understands it. The knowledge has turned to understanding. So when it comes to the Bible, you want to, being on this topic of adultery, one of the 10 commandments, you want to be looking at the old book, because the master came to fulfill the laws of the old book, is what he said with his mouth. Never mind all of the other stories. The rabbi said he came to fulfill the law of the prophets. So we want to look at that law. And that law is in the first 5 books, the Torah. And the Torah has been expounded upon in the tradition of Kabbalah. So it's not just the surface level reading of the Torah that we want to look at, but we want to look at how the sages, the Kabbalists, really explored each and every word in their Torah. And not just each and every word, but each and every letter. Because they knew that each letter, just like the Tantrics knew, each letter is a resonance. It's a primal resonance. And it's not just the order of these letters like this, but it's the order when you mix them up too. And it's not just the order when you mix them up too, but because the cosmic intelligence is mathematical and numerical, it's the number attribution to the letter as well. So these words have mystical meaning. And if you want to look at this, you want to review satsang number 3. This was when we got into the Kabbalah, and I started exploring in terms of not stealing, because that is one of the tantric yamas. I started exploring there, but you want to explore all of those commandments in the same terms. And this is a life work. And if we're talking about honing our swords, there's no better life work. And if you're talking about really getting into refining your capacity for mental engagement, and you're really interested in the mystical interaction of physics, okay, this is a very nice study to look into. Satsang number 3. Next, we come back to the 8s, and we find out where the 8s are currently producing nothing but drought. They are indolent. The mental capacity is not flourishing on this line of thought. Because when we talk about the worry card pops up again, the anxiety, the same thing. Now, that's not a coincidence. That's what's called synchronicity. That's how the universe answers us. With all of this shuffling, with all of this seemingly spontaneous desire to get back into guitar and asking the same question in the second artistic presentation, and that this just happens to fly out at the mention of that. Nah, this isn't you. This is how it happens. And it doesn't just happen like that now. It's happening every moment like this. And if we could just see how every word is rippling every moment, we would be forced to stillness because it would just be too much. And then we might have just an inkling of the responsibility I have with any gesture I make, with any word I speak. And I would know that there is a great effect being made by every tone, by every word. And my interactions and my actions would be either created consciously from that point on, or I would totally give up and just live ignorance is bliss because it's too much to deal with. This kind of mission is for 1 in a billion, brother. 1 in a billion. We don't hear about people coming along and engaging at this level too often because it is just superhuman. She comes again, the harlot of Babylon, and she is going to lead you into the 5s because it's not enough just to be baptized. You're going in the opposite direction. You're going in the reverse order that the master did. You're going to get baptized first, but then you're going to go out into the desert and see what is. And you're going to have this needful conversation with the demon side. You're going to have to see that side just to know what it is, and see that side just to know what it is. And this is going to be very, very empowering because you're neither going to choose that side, you're not going to choose that side, but you're going to see the whole lay of the land. And you're going to know everything exists. Everything exists. And in that knowing, you'll be able to come back to center and go any place you want. Choices. Choices. Talk about astral projection. That's just one layer. You go out into the astral, you can go out into the dreamscape. You can see what the imagination is, but you have to see the whole imagination. And that is a very, very, very broad and amorphous realm. It's changing, always changing. And so if you get stuck there, seeing all of the phantasms shaping, you can easily get lost. And so at some point, you'll have to make the decision regarding virtue, what is good, and allow yourself to travel on the sun, come into the solar plexus and engage with that imagination properly according to your vision. Creating a vision. Whatever's intuitive, whatever's inspiring you, Now you have to apply the intelligence to that and give it shape and give it form and bring it out into reality in a way that's going to benefit whatever the goal is. You're going to have juice. That's going to be the end result. You will be empowered. You will be able to walk into town rocking that suit and being in the eye of the people. People will see you, and that's going to provoke many different kinds of reactions. Okay, what do you want to do with that at that time? What do you need to do with that at that time? What is your relationship to any of that at that time? Some there will be a call for neutrality at that time, but you're always riding here. You're always riding on the path between the shoulders, between the readiness to create and the vision of what is reality in its entirety. So not to get stuck on the 5 side, and not even to get stuck on the 4 side, but when you're back here in the 4s, you can bring yourself up into the crown and just be and know, or you can bring yourself down into the heart center and get about heartfully creating reality too. That's what you will be enabled. Last card, Ace of Discs. The Ace of Discs is the ultimate card of physical potential. It's potential. Now it's a 1. We could call it a year. We could call it a lifetime. But the overarching meaning to this word is potential. What's the potential for the water bottle? There's potential. You could sit around and wonder if it's going to come to you. Or you could take a ride and pick it up. Is that practical for you? That's a question for you to answer, right? This card is potential. And it's on the central line where the high priestess is guiding you down into your heart. A lot's been said today about how you will engage your intention, how you will engage your imagination, how you will bring out all that you're wanting to express intelligently. You've received some serious advice about how and why to develop the mental capacities in order to augment your insight. Very, very needful stuff. Potential is a great place, being that you were talking about physics. That's how physics defines energy. Potential. It's a great place to finish up. You have a lot of potential. A ton of potential.